was received?
Well, it was really, rather than it being a sort of shock or a curtailment of proceedings, it was actually an extension because we were all prepared to finish after Series 5. And then Julian and Gareth and Liz and the sort of general creative consensus was that Julian wanted to write a further 9 episodes so that the ending of these characters' journeys wasn't too truncated. He felt it might feel a bit sort of rushed. So we all, said, yeah, why not? One more outing. So it was a lovely cherry on the cake rather than the cake being taken away.
Yes, I mean, it was a bit like opening any script. You always look forward to what you're going to find, and it's always not what you expect. And yeah, I mean, it's part of the whole excitement of doing any series.
I have to say, I had a lump in my throat reading the final episode, but it was as apart from the content of it, which is very sort of, the usual wonderful roller coaster of emotions, but I think I got a lump in my throat because I knew it was the last time I would ever read one of these scripts, and they've been such a pleasure to read. Each of us has been excited to see what happens to these characters each time they pop out of Julian's imagination onto the page. Well, I think there's a sort of general feeling of end of an era. Not only for our show, but also for estates like Downton. And that's characterized in the very first episode when we go to visit a neighbor of ours who's having to sell up. He can no longer make the income and the expenses sheets balance. And so he's literally selling the family silver and selling the family portraits. And that's a real wake-up call to the Crawley family that they must adapt or die.
It's sort of a nice thing that as it happened, historically, their way of life, the way of life that this family enjoyed, was really coming to an end at the same time our series does, because everything changed so drastically in that decade. So that the engine that fuels the final series, in that it's us saying goodbye to these characters, is also the engine that fueled history. People were saying goodbye to that way of life as they knew it. So the two things are happening simultaneously, and it's sort of a happy coincidence, really.
I suppose what makes me proud is the fact that people love our show, and that's we all work pretty hard. The crew, particularly, they work far harder than us actors and get very little attention for it. But I think we're all proud that audiences have stayed loyal and stayed hungry for the show, and that we've managed to keep the standards up. Each department working to the top of its game in each series, I think, and I personally think that this final series has is blazing with all guns.
I think it's meant a lot to me. Every time, which happens on occasion, you'll hear a very specific personal story or read a personal letter about somebody for whom the show has meant a lot at a tough time in their life. And there was one instance where I got in touch with somebody that I'd actually been in elementary school with, and her daughter had been very, very ill for a while, and watching the show had been a real escape for them both, and it's stories like that actually did really, really mean something to me.
I think he has a unique style. I mean, the fact that people sometimes say, "Oh, that's very Downton." In sort of general parlance, it's become a style of its own. And I was trying to think how to characterize it the other day. And there's a little sequence just in the end of episode 1 of the new series where we see probably 10 or 12 characters in one scene, there's a bit to do with the Bates and Anna plot. Then we go into the kitchen, we find a newfangled invention called the fridge. Julian always likes to nod to some new invention that scares Mrs. Patmore. We have a little discussion about our own past. Carson then comes in discussing another plot, and then we leave the scene with yet another plot that's going to be brewing throughout the series, and all this in the space of about a minute. And to be able to inject about 4 or 5 plots through character, with some warmth and wit and a bit of tension. That's what Julian does throughout. That's a little microcosm of what his ability is, to make you turn on a sixpence from laughter to a lump in the throat, high melodrama to poignancy. And it's a great skill, and not many writers have it. And I think that's part of the great quality of his work.
It might be also worth pointing out that it's not just a contribution. It's very unusual, the fact that Julian is the sole writer of every single minute of every single episode.